Okay,
Correct.
great. So I want to thank you all for inviting me to come and speak with you tonight. I get to talk about the thing that I love most about photography, which is practicing the art of seeing. My name is Warren Simons. I grew up in Western Massachusetts in a small town outside of Springfield, Mass. I've lived in Boston, northern Minnesota. I lived out on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon. And for the last 25 years, before I moved to Alabama 10 years ago, I lived in New York City for 25 years, which is where I met my wife, who is from Alabama, and we've retired here to Montgomery. Seeing is the key element, in my opinion, in generating interesting images. It's not the camera. It's not the camera gear. No camera takes the photo by itself. It's us, the photographer. So that's what I want to focus on tonight, how we see. I want to start here with a book by Margaret Rankel. It's called The Comfort of Crows, A Backyard Year. Margaret, there's a wonderful video online where she talks a little bit about this book. She says that she calls herself a backyard naturalist. She says she notices and studies and learns from the natural world. And for a year, she studied the creatures and plants in her backyard and then wrote this book. And her brother, Billy Rankel, is both an illustrator and a very fine photographer. You'll find him on Facebook. This is his cover, and his illustrations are throughout the book. I loved the book because it spoke very much to how I work. And it's interesting because we're talking about someone who's a writer and isn't in the visual art field. Anyways, the very first chapter in the book, which is short, 2 pages, the title is Wherever You Are, Stop What You're Doing. And each paragraph starts with a stop in which I did when I got rocked by this color reflection playing in the.
Excuse me, Warren.
Sure.
Excuse me. We don't see anything but your opening thing. I don't see any books.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I've got several PowerPoints open here. I'm going to come back to the share screen, see if I can get this straightened out. That's screen 2.
We do love technology.
Let's see. So do you see the book?
No.
Okay. All right. Let me just shut it all down. Start again. Bear with me. So sorry. Okay. You see a screen? Yeah.
I see the screen with some things on the side there.
Yep. Let's see if I can get rid of those. All right.
There.
All right. So as I said, Practicing the Art of Seeing. This is the book that I mentioned. Everybody can see that?
Yeah, we can see it. It's still got a header over the top of the screen, but
Let's move that.
Warren, you might try just starting the presentation from that slide, see if that slide comes up.
Now we got two screens,
Okay.
your home screen and then the book in the top right.
Warren,
So-
if you go back to the previous screen, yes, this screen, and then on the right-hand side, there's an up arrow. Click on that one.
Up arrow.
Yep.
There we go. Perfect. Who was that? Who made that suggestion? Thank you.
Umit.
Omid, great. Okay, so sorry. Margaret Rankel writes a great book. Her brother, who is a fabulous photographer, does the illustrations. And in each paragraph, in that short first chapter, she says, stop and look. She says, stop and ponder, like colors. She says, stop and listen. Like this day, a really stormy day at the Florida coast with the beach roaring and the wind howling. And these two people will saunter into a scene where the light is just amazing. She says, stop and consider. And this was a wonderful stop and consider moment because I saw this crazy reflection of the branches. And then I came across this little plant that was plucked down right in the middle of that. She said, stop and peer. These are footprints. I was standing at the beach, gawking at the sky and the water. I could feel waves gently lapping at my feet. And I looked down and I stepped back. And this is what I saw. I took two pictures and a wave came in and wiped it away. She said, stop and notice, like the shadow of a magnolia tree plus the leaves from that tree playing on a neighbor's house. Or stop and contemplate. Janice and I don't have any children, but we did have 3 cats and we adored them. She said, the world lies before us, a lavish garden. And I think that she's right about that. And it's always going to take our breath away. So I really loved the book. And I encourage you to, if you can find it in the library or maybe even a Kindle, it's cheaper than purchasing it. But it's a great book, and it actually speaks to how we as visual artists can work to pay attention to what's going on in the world. 10 years ago, I read this book. By the way, I came to photography quite late. I was 48 when I got my first camera. Prior to that, I had no art training, wasn't that interested, but I got a camera to go on vacation. I'll tell you in a little bit how that got started. But that was back in 2003. Well, in 2014, I bought this book, On Looking, A Walker's Guide to the Art of Observation, because I was studying this question of looking and how we see. Horowitz is an animal behaviorist from Columbia University. She wrote a really great book called Inside of a Dog and the Year of the Puppy about how dogs see the world. And she decided to do a walker's observation book. And she took a bunch of walks in her neighborhood with people who were doctors, entomologists, typographers, metallurgists, who all could talk about a little slice of what they were seeing when they walked down the street. It was fascinating. She said, this is just a really good example of how the experiences we have in our lives create filters in terms of how we see the world. But she said the most interesting walk that she took was with her 18-month-old son. This is not her son. This is me at about 18 months old, back in the mid-50s. And she said that children are the best visual explorers in the world. They're like beings from another planet. They have no idea what they're looking at. They're fascinated. Everything is wonderful, and they want to look at it all. And she said when she walked down the street with her son, it would take him a half an hour just to get to the corner because he wanted to look at the pebbles on the sidewalk, the pattern on the wall, the fire engines rushing by. She lives in New York City in Manhattan. And she said, children really are the best visual explorers. And she said, how can we see the world as children? She said, well, we can try looking at the world without thinking about the name or function of everything that catches our eye. She said, everything is relevant, but little is unseen if that's how we approach it. Minor White, who was a really wonderful photographer, he also talked about this, saying that there are certain things in the world that as adults we can come back to the wonder of what it was like when we were children and just be gobsmacked by it all. It might be a puddle on the way to work when I'm stopped and see some reflections in it. It could be the way they tore the side of a building off and left the other building exposed with some of the previous buildings still present. Or it might be something that I see on an afternoon walk during the summer that I'm kind of astounded by. This alligator, Pluto, who knows what, but there's definitely a figure there. It might even be a fire-breathing dragon. Or a reflection that I see in a car door as I'm taking my morning walk in the neighborhood. This is another book that I've read by Robert Henri, an art teacher and an artist. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, the object, he was talking about art, and I paraphrase it to talk about photos. The object isn't to take great photos. It's about being in that wonderful state of mind that makes it possible to receive and express the revelations that are already present in our visual world. That means you don't have to go out looking for something specific. You can actually see get yourself into a frame of mind where you can see the revelations that are already present. So how do you do that? And it's tied to this question of how we can see like children see it. And the first step for me is to slow down. And I mean, it's both a physical and a metaphorical question, or figurative. It means when you're walking through the woods, take your time. I try and take my time, slow down, look at everything, look at the puddles. It means when I'm looking at a bunch of umbrellas that are hanging in front of an art center, I stood there for about an hour until I actually saw the negative space here. There's the umbrellas, but then if you sort of let your eyes sort of wander back, you can actually see a figure of an animal in that negative space of the sky. It means slowing down and walking on the beach and looking and observing carefully. It means on a frosty November morning this past fall, paying attention when I walk by my neighbor's house, looking at the clippings that he's tossed in the street and looking at all the frost that has come to rest on it. Or when I'm doing the dishes and I see this amazing rainbow bubble. Another aspect of trying to work in this way that helps me get into a frame of mind where I can see things is to calm down. That means turning off the external noise. My phone, I generally don't go out on walks often with other people. It means turn off the internal dialogue, that internal chatter where I'm thinking about something I need to do or something that happened last week, or I'm not going to find anything to judge the critic, but to really try and calm down. So I'm slowing down and I'm calming down. And sometimes these little moments of revelation just pop into my field of vision randomly. I'm at a coffee shop, I'm in Birmingham, and I just happen to turn and look and I see this arrangement of light and shadow. Or I'm on a walk in the neighborhood and I turn and look and I see these palm fronds, one in front of the other, and the shadow of the one in the back playing through on the one in the front. And another part of this process is paying attention. So I'm trying to stay calm, I'm trying to slow down, and then I'm really looking carefully and paying attention. On this particular morning, I had spent about an hour roaming around in the neighborhood, and as I was coming back up the street, I was already in that deep state of the zone, or a flow state where I was just absorbed, totally absorbed in everything that I was looking at. And I happened to come across the trash bucket in my neighbor's front yard, and there were little droplets of dew or that had frozen overnight into these little balls, and the sun was playing on them, creating those shadows. And it was a really wonderful moment. I'm roaming around in back alleys because sometimes the back alleys are where the best things are, and I see this arrangement of the buildings and the lights. I'm coming off a beach, Eastern Lake, in the Florida Panhandle on a stormy morning. It was a wonderful day of looking, and this canoe, an older middle-aged man and his son climbed out of it and ran across the water. And I saw this and something I saw, paying attention, looking in the gutter, looking in the puddles that are in the gutter, and seeing this piece of paper just folded up in a very unusual way. This is pareidolia, when you see a human form in inanimate objects. I think this sort of looks like an older woman who's crossing the street, either with a cane or her bag of groceries and a shawl over her shoulders. Paying attention on, or I like to go for walks on rainy days, and the way the water is flowing in the gutter. The gutter is a great place to look. And I really work to practice the joy of exploring. So if you're calm, you're paying attention, you're slowing down, and you go exploring, that is, you go out to see what you're going to see, then sometimes you see this in a little stretch of swamp that's up the road from where I live. Or I'm at UAB, my wife is having a medical appointment, and I'm roaming around outside, and there's a swimming pool out there, and I see this inside that fountain. Or I've just stopped in to get my oil changed, and instead of just waiting, I decide I'm just going to go explore and see what I see. And I wander down the alley, and the building next door to the garage, it's got this plastic film on one of the windows, and it's all bubbled up. And I stand there for a little while and just let it come to me that there's this sort of figure present, and I take this image. Or it's a really rainy Friday night. On Saturday morning, the temperature drops 30 degrees. Everything flash freezes. My wife and I go for a walk. It's freezing cold. We decide to go home early. We take a shortcut, and this puddle froze in a really wacky way. It was still wet underneath, but this design and pattern was present. And that's all from, going out and about in the world. Robert Frank, who's an amazing Swiss-American photographer, he said, when people look at my pictures, I want them to feel the way they do when they want to read a line of poetry twice. I really like that quote. I think it's something we could all aspire to with our work. This was pollen floating in a puddle. I walk every day, and that gives me the opportunity to practice and look. And sometimes some really crazy stuff happens, and I don't know how it did, but on this particular day, there was enough pollen and just the right amount of water and a gentle wind and a stick in the street, and it created this phoenix-like creature for me to see. Or I've stepped outside after a rain, and I go over and I just walk around my truck because I want to see what's there. And this leaf is on the windshield with water droplets, and it turns out that your windshield glass is laminated. It's double layered at least, and it's laminated. So as the light plays through it and that shadow comes to play on the windshield, you see that double echo of that, and I think it has something to do with the layering of the glass. Or a friend invites us to come out and walk her property, and I see this scene. She's got a couple of ponds, and as I'm walking across the sand berm that splits the two, I can see this coming into balance, and I'm there, and I have my camera. Or I'm coming home from Auburn, and I notice this as I come up on an exit, and so I buzz off the highway, jump out, and I take it, and then I wonder if I should call my wife because maybe they just dropped a nuclear bomb on Montgomery, but thankfully it was just a thunder shower. So go exploring. I try and be curious when I go exploring. So in my neighborhood, there's a park, and there are trash cans in the park. And after it rains, I like to go out and walk about. I wander over to one of these trash cans one day. I'd never done this before. I peek in and I see this. It's the trash bag. The weight of the trash at the bottom is pulling on the bag, and the water droplets are playing on the bag. This image comes out of going exploring and being curious about what might be somewheres. Another image, a result of being curious, I go down to the main library in Montgomery. There's a stairway that goes up, a spiral stairway. I decide to walk underneath it and look up, and I see this arrangement of the different things that the staircase is made out of. It was kind of fun. I I had a solo show at Stonehenge Gallery here in Montgomery, and this image was in the show. And somebody came over and said, I just bought that image. He said, I was the architect who designed that stairway, and I'm really glad that you saw it and appreciated it. I see a little flash of light out of the corner of my eye. I'm walking on the beach. I wander over because I'm curious, and I see this particular scene. I'm roaming in my neighborhood, and one of the houses in the neighborhood has been abandoned for a while. And I decide to just go over and peek inside and see what I might see inside. And when I get there, I can see the window across the room, the living room, but I also can see the reflection behind me from the street. And it's just this wonderful, wacky arrangement, a surreal arrangement of what it is, what am I looking at? And I turn and look down the porch, and I see the ceiling fan on the porch has melted. It looks like it was made out of some sort of pressed wood, and the humidity just killed it. So this was like two birds with one stone, or double. It's buy one get one free. A wonderful moment. So exploring and being curious for me is the way to practice serendipity. It's not just blind luck that I see these things. It's actually an organized exploring and being curious, slow down, calm down, trying to see the world with the same delight and wonder that kids do. And when I do that, then these moments of serendipity happen. And this is how it works. I'm standing in the kitchen and I'm having coffee, and I look out the window. It's like 6:30 in the morning. I'm in my bathrobe. I see this on the windshield. It was a frosty night. I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. I think I'll just wander out there and take a picture. So I go grab my camera, wander out in my bathrobe and slippers, take this photo, and then I decide for some reason to pull that leaf off of the windshield, and I see this underneath it, which was the condensation that was underneath it that hadn't frozen like the rest of it around the leaf. And I'm like, wow, how cool is that? Look at that imprint. So I take a picture, and then I go back inside and I finish preparing my coffee, and I take one more look out the window and I see this. And I run for my camera and go back out there and take one more image. So this condensation, because it's still below freezing, freezes into this imprint of the leaf. And while I'm not saying that any of these three images are award-winning or are going to win some sort of competition, it just goes to show that sometimes some really interesting stuff can happen when I practice all that I've just talked to you about. On this particular day, I decide it's raining. My method when I was living in New York was I got an hour for lunch. I'd gobble down my lunch in 20 minutes and run outside for 40, just wandering around taking pictures. On this day, it's raining and I almost didn't go out, but I decided to go out anyways. And as I got to the street corner, there was an overhang from a doorway, and I got up underneath it because it was raining pretty good. I'd walked that route 13 years. I worked at that place, and I looked up, and that overhang had a sheet of metal stapled, screwed into the overhang, and you could see reflections in the street. And if you look down at the bottom here, you can see the rivets that screw that into the overhang, and the bend of the sidewalk that is part of the way the metal was bending. So this is total serendipity, but it comes out of a certain practice. I'm roaming on a beach out in California. Janice and I went out for 3 weeks last year. I'm looking at the driftwood and I see this and I think, wow, this is like Sasquatch on the beach. I decide to go roaming out in the countryside here in Montgomery, and a car goes whizzing by me on this dirt road and kicks up all this dirt. And there it is. I jump out of my car and I take that image. Or I'm walking to work and I walk by a store that features mannequins, and they're in the process of either taking down or setting up a display. And the back of the display, everything else was pulled out of there except for the back wall, which was papered in black. And that reflection, and this mannequin was in the display, but the reflection of the street was what was coming from behind me. And it was just this giddy, wonderful moment of these two things combined together. And there I am. And serendipity smiled on me, and I took it. Where Janice and I run off to Costco here in Montgomery to go shopping. And as we do, we're paying attention. We see this swirl of blackbirds flying around, a murmuration they call it, and um, we get right up on them, and then all of a sudden they alight on these power lines, and Janice yells, "Pull over!" And I pull over and I jump out and I take a photo. The moon just happened to be there. That was total luck, total serendipity. And on the right-hand side, you can see the birds are just starting to lift off. A second later, they all flew away. What a great, delicious moment. Or I'm standing on a street corner in New York and I turn and look over my shoulder, and this happens. So looking, exploring, being curious, slowing down, calming down, it all leads to these moments of serendipity. And it's a practice. And I've proven to myself again and again that by working in that way, these moments happen. I read a really great book called The Zen of Seeing. Frederick Frank is the author. He said, "Let seeing be the celebration of experiencing, of the eye in love, instead of pictures to be framed." I think what he's saying is enjoy looking, fall in love with the world that you see, and don't worry about pictures to be framed, whether you succeed or fail. Let that random drop popsicle on the street, just gobsmack you. Or the way a leaf sits on the hood of a car on a rainy day and you just happen to be walking by and you turn and look and it looks like a swan. Or you're cooking oatmeal in the morning and you look in your pan and you think, my God, there's a whole galaxy in that pan, and you run and grab your camera. Or you see this one red leaf on an otherwise gray monochromatic sidewalk where the four panels meet. Ralph Steiner is an American photographer and filmmaker, and he said, "Eventually I discovered for myself the utterly simple prescription for creativity. Be intensely yourself. Don't try to be outstanding. Don't try to be a success. Don't try to do pictures for others to look at. Just please yourself." And I think what he's saying is give up all hope of success and all fear of failure, and just go look and let the world resonate in some way with who you are. And you might be standing on a viewing deck on a roof in Santa Fe, New Mexico on an early one morning, and you see the contrails playing in this really wacky way. You might be putting pots and pans away, and the reflections in the bottom of the pan really grab you, and you run for your camera. Or you're walking on a beach in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and you see this really interesting arrangement of stones that look very much like a face of some sort. Or you come into the dining room. I come into the dining room, and we have this wonderful, colorful, patterned tablecloth, and it's very early in the morning, and this is the time of the year when the sun comes through that window and it's playing on my glasses, and it's all asking me if I'm paying attention, and luckily I was. Pablo Picasso, we all know who he was. He says, "Inspiration does exist, but it must find you working." That is, you have to practice this every day, wherever you are, whether you're in a grocery store, whether you're at a friend's house and you walk into their kitchen, you're at the beach and it's a foggy day and you decide, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to see a beautiful sunrise, but you decide to go anyways, and you see this when you get to the beach. Or you're walking in a park on a snowy day, or you're walking home and you see this on a fire escape, and it just is amazing. You really have to practice all the time, and it's not a painful practice. It's a labor of love. I'm just passionate about it. I'm just so crazy ecstatic. I'm so glad to be retired so that I can actually work on this all the time. This was just a wet paper plate in the road that looked a little bit like a moon, a full moon. Ernst Haas, all of these photographers that I'm mentioning, these artists, I have a resource list, and I'll send along to you so you can see who they were and the photographers that I like and some of the books that I've read. Anyways, he said, my theory of composition, he says, it's simple. Don't release the shutter until everything in the viewfinder feels right. And I think what he's saying is, I'm not worried about the rule of thirds, the golden mean. I'm not worrying about all of that. It's important to look at that, think about it, maybe even study it, but then you got to let it go. And then you just, when you look at something, you have to try and discern where the framing is. And then you pull up your camera and you look through the viewfinder and you find it. You feel your way to the composition and arrangement. Like here, I stood there for a few moments trying to think about what was the arrangement, where did it feel right, and I was looking through my camera and I zoom in a little and zoom out a little bit, and I found this is where it felt right for me, where in the upper left hand corner things are running off of the edge of the image, the way this ceiling curves on the upper right side and comes down to the middle part of it, the way those cross beams in the window play with each other, the shadows on the wall and the bend in the wall. It was all, it wasn't in an intellectual discussion for me. It all had to do with looking at it, pulling up my camera, looking at how it all framed and finding that sweet spot and then taking the picture. Same with this, walking down a country road, looking at the flooding in a ditch, and seeing this crazy reflection and trying to find where the perfect arrangement was so that there was some balance, that it felt right. Or here, I'm at a museum in Munich, Germany, and I look over the third floor landing down and look down at the bottom floor, and I see this arrangement of chairs and people staring off into space or looking at their phones. And I pretty quickly discerned, especially with that pole in the wall in the upper right-hand corner, where the balance was, without getting caught up too much in trying to figure it out intellectually, and settled on that composition. Or we're in Yosemite National Park in July. The lake, this is Gaylord Lake at 10,000 feet, and the ice is just melting in July. And it was covered with pollen, and it created these wonderful patterns on the surface of what must have been slushy, icy water. And I just felt like having that little inlet of ice or water or whatever it was, plus the way these patterns of pollen played together, that just felt like a good arrangement. You know, this is how painters work. They look at a scene, then they start composing it on their canvas, and they're thinking about, how does this piece and that form and this form, how does it relate to the forms around it? How does it relate to the entire frame? So that they can find their way to a composition. And that's how I try and work too. And I came to that conclusion early because I was reading some books by artists, and I thought that was a good idea. And I actually printed out the quote that somebody had about that. This is just a stairwell looking up, or a roadway out in California while we were on vacation. I'd been on the beach all morning on a foggy morning. It was wonderful. And then I started driving back to where we were staying, and I saw this because the fog had just lifted. Yeats is an Irish poet and writer. It isn't just visual artists who are going to have something to say to us, like Margaret Rankle. He said, "The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." So and I love the quote. The question is, how can we enhance our senses? How can we help them grow sharper? Well, I think part of it is to recognize that there's form in the visual world and to pay attention to that. It could be something you see while you're wandering through some abandoned quarries that have been filled with water, and the way that the pattern in the quarries appear. It could be a big frond leaf, and the way the light plays through it. And this is form. These are forms and lines playing together. I'm getting ready to throw away an old skanky dish drainer, the bottom of a dish drainer, because it had gotten wet so often that the minerals in the water had created this pattern on it. And it's sitting on a counter. I'm getting ready to take it outside and throw it in the trash. And I see the light coming through the window. I'm playing on it, and I run for my camera. It's form, something I see at a hotel. I'm wandering through the Atlanta airport after flying in one day, running off to catch my next flight, and I see this in a bar. Janice and I are getting ready to fly back to Montgomery from Seattle, and the terminal has a huge escalator that's lit and colorful. And we both stepped off the train on a Monday morning. There was no one else there, and we both sort of like our heads snapped back. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, "You got to take that picture." Something I see on a sidewalk, the arrangement. It's all about the arrangement and how that interacts with you, what it makes you feel like. How do you respond to it? And there's lots of color in the world. It might be the colorful tiles on your front porch that are playing through the glass tabletop that's out there on a foggy morning, and it's all misted up, creates this interesting image. Or leaves that have been in this Japanese maple all week, and I'm photographing it against the blue sky. It was beautiful weather. And I came out on this day thinking, okay, one more day. And then I look, and all the leaves have fallen out of the tree, literally like on command from the universe somewheres. And I'm like, oh man. And I walk down the sidewalk, and I look in the bird bath, and this is the best image I took all week, the one that I responded to most strongly. Or oil beating up in a parking lot on a day where the sun has just broken through the fog, creating these wonderful colors. I put the dishes away. I washed the dishes and put them away after they've dried. And on this particular day, the water pitcher that we have that's beveled was sitting on the counter with some colorful cutting boards behind them. And I saw this and ran for my camera. Or something I see while I'm wandering in the woods. Color is everywhere. Open kitchen restaurants. Sometimes it's lots of color, and other times it's just one single color popping against what is pretty much a monochromatic background. Roaming up the sidewalk one day during my lunchtime walk, and I saw this table out on the sidewalk. There's lots of light and shadow. Sometimes it's literally a light and its shadow, or it can be, I do our neighbors a favor. I go in and push their shades up and pull them down when they're away on vacation. And I never, ever, ever leave home without my camera. When I leave, it's always in this little carry case, which is attached to my belt. And on this morning at 6 o'clock, even though I was just going next door and coming back, I put it on, and I'm glad I did, because when I got there, I saw that. Something playing through wrought iron railing on a set of stairs. Something I see in my neighborhood. There are multiple leaves here, and the light playing through the leaves in the background are creating shadow on the leaf in the foreground. Neighbor's car light is bouncing off of that. It's coming through the window. The blinds are partially open and creates this wonderful pattern on the wall. Amit Kalantri. I have to admit, I don't know much about him except that he's a magicianist and a mentalist performer. What would he have to say to us? He said, this is a quote from him: "A photograph shouldn't just be a picture, it should be a philosophy." That is, you're not just a photographer because you go out every once in a while and take a picture. It's everything that you do in your life. You become obsessed by all of it, and it actually becomes a way of living. To be an artist, you're living as an artist. You're not just an artist occasionally. You might be putting dishes in the sink and see the way the shadows play on it. You might be totally out of your mind, happy and giddy when you see this shadow of a hose, and it's the contraption that it's wound up on, and the way the pipe's coming out of the wall. It looks like this giant bug. I didn't get too close to it. I wasn't sure. The way that light plays on a fire escape, or again, the dishes. Janice says, let's put them in the dishwasher. I'm like, no, let's not. I want to do them, because you just never know when something like these, what do you call them? I have one of these plants in the kitchen. It's on the counter, jade plant, and the shadow is playing and is bouncing on the bottom of the sink. Or we're at a friend's house, and this glass vase is in a window across the room, and the light's coming through, and it creates this amazing thing on the wall. Lots of reflections in the world. Reflection in a UPS truck windshield. Reflections on windows in buildings in New York City. Reflections on water at Gulf Shores, at my in-laws' place. Reflections on the hood of a car, and the way the light and the color and the image from the house is bouncing on the hood and the windshield. Or reflections playing on that glass table that I talked about earlier, and this one magnolia leaf playing together. more car reflections. I never, when Janice and I go shopping, I say, go in, shop, take your time. Um, I'm not going to be bored. And I roam around in parking lots and just look at everything that's going on them, and I have a blast. And sometimes, you really get lucky and somebody's painting the trim on a window and you see his reflection in the window. Or you get this really dolly crazy moment in a Jaguar that's parked behind a building that's in a commercial district just down the street from where I live, and you're roaming around out back and you see this wonderful crazy, because the Jaguars have these really round, smooth curves to their body, and you can get some really interesting things going on. I try not to forget that there's lots of people in the world, sometimes who are pondering heavy things, sometimes who just wander into a pink scene and just happen to have a pink skirt or pink drink with her pink straw or pink lipstick with her pink headband. And it's a perfect arrangement. And here's another image of a man with his son. Just it looks like they're kind of having some, a challenge. And this guy was, I felt like he was related to narcissist. He really loved himself, and he was looking at his face in this truck mirror. This was a iron worker across the street from where I worked, and this woman saw me coming, and I saw her, and I saw the Twigs versus Vinny poster on the telephone pole there, and I just thought, I have to take this image whether she appreciates it or not. She never flinched. She was like, whatever. Photographer Robert Adams, another wonderful American photographer, said photographers are open to gifts. As the poet John Clare wrote, I found the poem in the fields and only wrote them down. That is, he didn't make the stuff up. He went out, he experienced something, and then he wrote down what his experience was. Sometimes people in the world aren't actually animate. They're in smashed cans in the street, or like that other image, they're in driftwood on a beach, or the arrangement of plastic in the street with leaves, or they might even be in clouds if you're just looking up and paying attention to that. Wynne Bullock said, in a photograph, I want to evoke a feeling of the surface physical world, that is what I see, but also a feeling of what lies mysteriously and invisibly beneath the surface. And I think what he's talking about is taking a picture of what something is, but also what else it is, what it evokes in you. And here's some images that I've come across that did that for me. Just these wonderful moments where something occurs and it isn't just a tree and the water in the background with that fence, but there's something evocative here. Same with this. I think partly here it's the darker shadow, the green on the back window, this wonderful funny moment of these kids and this dog looking back at me saying, please help me, don't let those kids touch me. It can be a crazy wild sunrise, and on a particular morning. It's not just clouds and sky. It elicits something, a wonderful sort of melancholy moment in March of something that I saw on my way home, or the sunlight playing in front of the Montgomery Country Club. I'm on my way to Atlanta one early spring morning, and I drive through this area and I see this and I pull over and jump out of the car. I spent a whole day walking around along the riverfront here, and as I got back to my car, this is a whole day of shooting and looking, and I turn and look over my shoulder and I see this arrangement of trees, and there was just something about it that really grabbed me, partly to do with the arrangement of the trees in relationship to each other, and also what's going on further off in the background and in the foreground here. But it was a wonderful evocative moment for me. Sensibilities, a lot of things happen in our lifetimes. This is my dad, and this is me less than a month old. And this is me at about 1.5 or 2. I've already had a body of experience. That little brain and that big head is growing every day, and it's in part its development is being driven by the things that I see in the world, and also, just genetically what's going on inside. And here's the family, a big crazy family, and a lot of crazy things happened. and I'm about 5 here. So there's more things being imprinted on my brain and helping form my personality. Your personality, all the things that make you who you are your sensibilities. Here I am in my early 20s. I had gone to college for a year. I quit. For the next 15 or so years, I worked on a number of different factory jobs. The last one I had was as a baggage handler for an airline. Before I decided that was just work I couldn't do anymore. So I went back to school and I got a degree in clinical lab sciences, and I spent the next 13 years, here I am in my early 40s, looking at tissue in a microscope. And this is me a couple of months ago. So that's 6 photos, a whole lifetime. There's a ton of things that occur in a lifetime. Things, happy things, sad things, tragic things, wonderful things. That make us who we are, and those are and those are our sensibilities. And because each of us have our own set of experiences, our sensibilities are uniquely our own, and all of them come to play every time we press the shutter button on the cameras, whether we realize it or not. They guide us in what we see, how we respond to what we see, and what we artistically express based on what we see. Ansel Adams said, you don't make photos just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you've looked at, the books you've read, the music you've heard, and the people you've loved. Kurt Weston, who's a legally blind photographer, he can actually see a bit, but he's legally blind. He said, seeing, as we know, is a combination of all our physical, mental, psychological, and spiritual states. And I think both of them are dead on right. And this is a little Venn diagram. It's not Venn, but 47 years, I get my camera in 2003, all of those life experiences. And then afterwards, a whole bunch of other things based on exploring art, seeing, and all of that leads to, every time I take a picture, all of that's coming to play, but also coming to play in this talk today. So I've spent a lot of time studying. It's really important. That's the only way you're going to learn and expand your horizons on these questions. Here's 3 books that I love: Photographer's Side by Michael Friedman, The Art of Photography by Bruce Barnbaum, and Freeman Patterson's Photography and the Art of Seeing. I studied with these folks for 4 years. They run the Mixong Institute. They're Buddhists, and they have a wonderful approach to seeing the world, and I learned a lot from them. It was a valuable experience. And these are some other books. I've talked about 2 of them already. John Berger is an art critic, and he wrote some really wonderful things that I found useful and helpful. It isn't just photography, but it's people who draw for art and drawing from observation. It can be landscape painters. Joseph Albers was a famous art teacher at Yale University and wrote this seminal book on the interaction of color. All of these things can help us come to a better understanding of how to see the world and practice. Here's some other books. They're all in this list I'm going to send along to you. I love poetry, and poets have something to teach us and say to us about how to see the world. This is Betty Edwards. She wrote this book as part of her dissertation for her doctorate degree, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. It's a book that is taught in most beginning drawing classes. I bought the book because I wanted to try and teach myself how to draw. This image, it's a contour drawing of the composer Stravinsky by Picasso, printed like this in the book upside down. And she said, don't try and discern what this is. Don't try and understand what you're looking at. Just make a mental note of cutting it into 4 little discerning, discrete quadrants, and then look at the shapes in those quadrants and try and draw them. And I draw like a 3rd grader, but I decided I'd give it a shot, and I did. And when I rotated the book right side up, and also my image, mine on the right, the book on the left, I was godsmacked. This was the first time I realized that if I could forget the name of things and just really look, take a deep dive into looking, that something unique I could see in a way that I could then translate using a pencil onto paper. It really knocked me out of my chair. This was even before I bought my first camera back in 2003, and my life went like this. It just changed course completely. This was the beginning of it. They teach workshops around the country. On the left is day 1, on the right is day 5. These are images from people who took their workshops. This is not somebody learning how to draw in 5 days. It's about learning how to see and then translating that using a pen to actually learn how to stop seeing the associations. As soon as you think about an association with something, you really don't see the details anymore. You're more inclined and wrapped around the association. And those are things that we can work on as visual artists. Very quickly after I got my first camera, let's see. What do I got? About 10 more minutes? 5 more minutes? All right,
Yeah,
I'll
up to
speed.
you, up to
Okay.
you.
All right, I'll speed through this. One of the first images I ever took was this. And it was a puddle reflection, very much like that drawing in the drawing of the right side of the brain book, upside down. You can't really tell quite what it is, but you can see the shapes and how they interact with each other. So in terms of composition, it's a helpful way to come to understand how to compose. And then I rotated it upside down, which made it look right side up. And I was learning how to use Photoshop, and I enhanced the colors on those leaves and did some contrasting work. And I was gobsmacked. I was seriously happy because I'm really a frustrated painter. And I thought, wow, I can paint with my camera. So I roamed around the city, New York City, looking for puddles for the next 4 months. Empire State Building, Central Park in the fall, a steel plate in a roadway on a rainy day, the UN building in a puddle reflection up on 42nd Street. But you don't get too many puddles in New York. And I sort of was running out of, and I wasn't shooting anything else. I was just looking for puddles. So I happened upon this idea. I took some shiny Mylar paper and I took two-sided carpet tape and I essentially dry mounted it to a 1/2-inch piece of foam board. It looks like this. That's how thick it is. That's what it looks like. And then I would roam around and Janice is holding it here so you can see it. But when I used it, I would have it in one hand and my pocket camera in another. And I'd roam around and I would get reflections in the paper. And this was the first time I used that board was for the Jean-Claude Christo Gate exhibit in Central Park back in 2004. Looking at this is how I saw it on the board. This is how I took the picture. And you get this strong sense of a vortex pulling you in. But when you turn it right side up, this is what was actually there. A bench, a pathway, the gates leading off into the distance. And it was another really wonderful moment where I thought, you know, this is going to be a really deep process of learning how to compose, how to see compositionally using this board. Well, for 5 years, I did nothing but roam around with that board and take pictures in it. This was something I saw early one morning when I got up to get a glass of water. At 6 in the morning, I ran for my board and camera. It's my kitchen counter. That's the fire extinguisher and the other things that are sitting on the counter, light coming through the window. New York City is a great place to roam around. This guy was reading the newspaper. I'm on the Brooklyn Bridge and a tug is coming up the river. The skyline is in the background. I'm up at Woolman Rink and people are skating. And because of the texture of the park, I mean, the texture of the paper, the individuals who are on the rink skating don't actually quite look like you would expect humans to look like. They're more like little stick figures, but you get a sense of what it is. And it was just, it thrilled me.
Warren,
Yes.
please don't rush through. We are not going to cut you off, and this is too good to miss part of it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we don't have a strong time frame.
Okay, cool.
This is awesome. So
Well, so this board really, it made me super happy because I could essentially paint with my camera and then the work I did in the digital darkroom. I would roam for hours and hours all around Manhattan and Brooklyn. This was Upper Manhattan, which is a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. And this was the shaved ice guy pushing his cart with the different colored juices and things that he would pour over the shaved ice. This was Central Park in the spring, and I thought, oh, I'm an impressionist painter because I love impressionism. And there are fruit vendors on every corner. And as I was lining this shot, I was holding the board. I was actually turned away from this person. I had the board over my shoulder so I could see the reflection on the board. And just as I took it, that taxi cab came into the scene. And I thought, wow, that is like luck upon luck. So I worked that way for 5 years before I shifted away from it. Recently, I've actually started to come back to it because I'm just exploring. And there are other art mediums that we can play with. No matter what it is, that work is going to inform how we see the world and what we express with our cameras. So I've taken some drawing classes. I actually got around to doing that. And this was a charcoal drawing, and this is another one. Learning how to see, to really pay attention, observational drawing, that is drawing from life, where you look at something, you're paying attention to the way the shadow is playing on this model's shoulder, the way that the light and dark are playing on her sweater. And she's African American, so that the way the light is bouncing on her skin and then those shadows that are playing on the wall, you stare at someone like this for 4 hours in a morning, and you can really slow down and start to see in a more profound way than I ever thought possible. And then I roamed out in the hallway, and with some pastels, I decided to draw these chairs. And turning around, I saw a water fountain, and another session, I drew this water fountain. And then I tried my hand at painting, staring at a bowl of cereal, a finished bowl of cereal, Cheerios to be accurate, and looking at the shadow on the counter is just a really wonderful exercise in looking. Same with this plate and the forks and the napkins. I was really tickled that I felt like I had expressed the three-dimensionality of that napkin on what is a flat surface. It's really thrilling, even with photography, when you can create that illusion. It's really wonderful. And most recently, I've started doing some lino cuts. This actually is not a piece of linoleum. It's a piece of gamuban. It's a Japanese hard plastic, synthetic plastic, that is softer than linoleum, so it's easier to cut, but holds up in a printing press. And because when you cut it and then you ink it and put the paper on it, you pull it and you run it through the press, and then you pull the paper, it's flipped. So this was the result of that inking and printing. And I'm working on this most recently. I've just started down this road. This is something that I carved this weekend. I had a blast with this, but I haven't inked it yet. But what I did was I like to see how it's going to look. So I took a piece of paper, I put it over the top, and like a gravestone rubbing, I dragged charcoal over the top of that. And I just love this pattern of, it's almost like an Escher something or other. All of this is part of the process of living artistically, practicing, and it all comes to play in my photography as well, in terms of what I see and what stops me in the visual world. I've been a member of the Atlanta Photography Group for a while. I really enjoyed their portfolio review sessions. I never thought, everything that I've shown you are these one-off images, and that's essentially how I work. I never go out looking to shoot a project or a series, but I took some portfolio review, I joined some review sessions, and it got me thinking about whether I could apply this slow down, calm down, look deeply, just don't have any preconceived idea about what you're going to see. Just go and look and see what happens. How you interact with the visual world, but to do that in a way where if I went back to the same subject matter again and again and again and worked in that way, what would happen? And this is a canna lily patch in my neighborhood that I started visiting 2 years ago. And these are the images, some of the images from that work. Every day is different. I never go there with the idea that this is what I'm going to see. I just go and let the wonderful revelations happen. And it turns out I actually have quite a series here. I've framed 20 of these pieces, and they were part of a show that I had at the Johnson Center in Troy, Alabama recently. just having a lot of fun with. Every day is different. Sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's just finished raining. It's really wonderful. And this is another set of things that places that I revisit subject matter, and then something interesting comes of it. So I'm a frustrated painter. I love the landscape. I grew up in Western Massachusetts in the foothills of the Berkshires. I love Yosemite. I love the mountains. Anyways, the landscape. I just love it. But I'm not a landscape photographer, although sometimes I do. I'm in the landscape and I take images. Well, this was a crack in a cement wall in a parking lot, and I thought, wow, that kind of looks like a landscape. So I took that picture and I went home and I painted on it in the digital darkroom. That is, in Photoshop, I used the painting tools and painted on it and created this landscape. And that was the birth of what I call my imaginary landscapes. This was a wall, a cement block, retaining wall. There was some moss and gunk on it. And I got home and I did this to it by painting on it, creating sort of a little starry night look. This was a really astounding moment in a parking garage. There was just this water and stains and this stuff bleeding out of the cement. And boy, it just grabbed me that there was a waterfall here, and I think it worked. When I go to the Gulf, there are all these these lakes, fresh water bodies of water, and occasionally they'll break through and interact with the Gulf, break through the sand berm that separates them from the Gulf. They're very rare in the world. They're on the Florida Panhandle. They're in North Carolina and somewhere's in New Zealand, and that's it. Anyways, when the channel is open and water's coming and going, when I'm down there, I get in the channel and I walk down the channel from the lake to the Gulf, looking at the way the pattern is playing. You know, as the tide comes in and then goes out, it sort of shaves off like a knife. It cuts the sand, and there's this remaining pattern in that sand wall. And I liked this one a lot, and I saw the landscape possibilities here, and I painted on it and created that. And this was something I saw on the roadway. It was the road was still a little bit wet. It had just rained. There was this dirt and sand. Some of the sand was still wet, and I did this to it. And I just had this sense of floating above it in the clouds somewhere, looking down at a shoreline, and added those little stars in the background. This was something, again, I saw at the beach. I rotated it and painted on it and created this. So I'll end here. Mary Oliver is a really wonderful poet. If you've never read any of her poetry, just look it up on the internet. There's tons of it there. And if you really like it, get some of her books at the library. She's someone who really worked to pay attention and then wrote about it, just like Margaret Rankle, just like all these other artists who I've mentioned. She said, our job as artists is to pay attention, and this is our endless and proper work. And then here's Bernard So I'm sure I mispronounced it. He's a French photographer, and he said something that I just love. He said, to take photographs, one has to be like a monk to achieve a maximum degree of concentration, like with meditation, and at the same time possess a delirious disposition. This is why I say that photography is a meeting place for that sort of delirium and absolute peace. Photography is made up of these two moments, and they combine to create dynamite. So that's it. That's my presentation.
Well, Warren, that was fantastic. I don't know, anybody got any questions?
I'd be glad to revisit anything that anybody wanted to look at.
No questions, but well done and point well taken. And I think the Buddhist reference kind of makes sense as I hear your presentation.
Yeah,
The influence.
it's really kind of interesting. You know, I didn't come across them until 2011, so I'd been working for almost 10 years. And it flowed naturally from, I used to be a jogger and I couldn't jog anymore because of my knees, but I could walk. So I spent lots of time roaming around, and then I got the camera. And then I just started looking and seeing things. I wasn't looking consciously for anything. I would just, New York is a great place to roam around. You can walk anywheres. And it all just sort of happened naturally, that I came to this method of just looking and taking pictures, and I wasn't worried about creating a series or trying to get my work into any particular show. I was just having a blast. And then I took a workshop with a photographer in New York. His name is Jay Maisels, and Maisel. He's a great photographer. There's some really good videos about him. And I was on Amazon looking up books on how we see, the art of seeing, photography and seeing, painters and seeing, and just seeing what came up with those searches in Amazon. And that one book, the first book that those folks wrote, called The Practice of Contemplative Photography, I looked at it, and lo and behold, on the back cover, there's a pull quote from Jay Maisel. He must have taken courses with him or something. And when you listen to his videos online, there's a thread of how he works and how they work that are have a common place, a common meeting place. So to work with them for 4 years, I took some workshops with them and looked through their material. It was a very helpful way to, it put into word how I was working, and then it made it even more conscious for me. I worked with them for about 4 years, and then I moved on. But I haven't stopped practicing in this way, and I've added more and more things as I find other photographers who have interesting things to say and how they work and their process. And of course, I've expanded that by looking much more broadly beyond photography and all of the visual arts, and even things like poetry and writing. Um, I've actually, I perused the obituary page in the New York Times. Um, those pages are amazing. I mean, I'm sad that people have passed on, but when you read about somebody's life, you inevitably will find somebody that has no relationship to visual arts at all, who says something about how they work. Or it could be an athlete, it could be an actor, it could be a famous public person. Inevitably, I find a little kernel of some wisdom in there that just, I go, aha, yes, I should think more about that. So anyways, it all comes to play. And the more I study and look and think and try and expose myself to as much of it as possible, I think the deeper the process becomes for me. And it is such a blast. Oh my God. I'm telling you, I was meat and potatoes, like a meat and potatoes kind of guy before I got my first camera. And I can't believe that this is where I am and what's happened. It just, my life has radically changed. The only other thing that had a bigger effect on me was when I met my wife. She really helped make my world very interesting. And then this also.
That's great. We got one question here in the chat. Some of us are probably more gearheads, and what kind of camera do you carry around all the time?
Well, I started out with a Pentax Optio 550. Actually, I had a Nikon, I think it was a Nikon D50, with a big long lens on it. And that didn't last long because you will roam around for 2 or 3 hours, that dangling off of your neck. And it really, it gets heavy. So I started with a Optio 550, a Pentax, and it fit into this little camera case that I would wear on my belt. And then in 2012, Sony came out with this really wonderful, it's called the Sony RX 100. This is version 7. I started with version 1. I had 2 versions of 3, and then when they came out with 7, it has a 24 to 200 millimeter lens on it. It's a fixed lens, it doesn't come off. But it has this wonderful little back end thing that, swings out. It has a high-end Zeiss lens on it, and it has the processor in that is almost as big as the processor was in my digital SLR. And so it takes really, really good photos. But more and more these days, I'm also taking photos with this. which is my iPhone 15 Pro Max. My God, these things, holy crow, they really take good photos. And this is even easier to carry around. And occasionally, when I'm in a really contrasty situation where there's a lot of bright light and a lot of dark shadow, my camera just can't grapple with it. But the phone, whatever they've done with the software here, the phone does. And I've taken some really wonderful images with the phone. So I take them both with me, and I never leave the house without my phone. So if I've left my camera at home, I always have a camera. And ultimately, whatever camera you're using, it's going to be good enough. Even, I mean, I've seen beautiful pinhole camera photos. It really, a lot of it has to do with what stops us in the world, learning how to pay attention, and then I know that based on my experience, that if I can get into that state of mind, I'm going to see stuff. And the proof is in the pudding that I presented to you today.
Warren, we want to thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.